Hey everybody, welcome to Musings. I've been wanting to talk about this somehow for a while because it's one of the big mega trends. When I decided I'm going to make a bit of a pivot and stop kind of, talking about like specific industry reforms and talk about some of the mega trends that I think will affect all of us, who are in the industry. One of the big ones that I started like wanted to focus on a little bit was macroeconomics, which is interesting because I'm not an economist, but I kind of look at sort of the track record of economists over the last, I don't know, 10 years, and I think, oh, how bad could it be? How much worse could I possibly do it? But I just didn't know, there's so much coming out, there's so much out there already. I didn't know how to kind of get into it, but I thought I found something today. I saw a video on YouTube. It was kind of mind blowing. And I'll put the link and everything. I think it's something you should absolutely go see the whole thing. The first half of it is pretty heavy duty macro, talking about Fed fund rates and all this stuff. You might get a little bit lost, but I think there are two other sections because it turns out what they really sort of talk about housing and its impact from, and I think impact on the larger economy. And I thought both of the people, both the host and the guest, just made really, really excellent points. So as a way of experiment, I thought I would maybe watch some of that with you guys and kind of, sort of react to it, I guess. And I think it'll allow us to get into some of the more important things to discuss. So first of all, the video is this one. It's from a channel called Blockworks. And frankly, they only have 45,000 subscribers. There should be a lot more. I guess I'm going to look live. Watch this. Look, I'm subscribing. Yeah. They do some really good work. As the name suggests, they might be a little bit headed, talking about sort of crypto, currency related stuff. But fact is, anybody kind of in that space, you can't help but come across macroeconomic ideas at least, right? In any event, the name of the video is What Will Happen If the Fed Raises Rates with Danielle DiMartino Booth. Now, this is super interesting because Danielle DiMartino Booth, she's the CEO and Chief Strategy Officer, I think, of Quill Intelligence. It's a kind of investment services company. But she's also a former Fed governor, I think, out of Dallas. And, is one of the more interesting, one of the more outspoken, I think, commentators on the economy, especially macroeconomics, especially around, Fed action. And I thought it's relevant because why? Well, if you go on Inmit, if you go on some of the industry press right now, the thought is the Fed has come out and they've announced that they are planning to raise rates. They have announced that they're going to taper. They're going to stop buying, as much in mortgage-backed securities, which will, raise rates. And there's already been some reports of mortgage rates jumping up and why, if you're a buyer, you really need to act now. Don't wait because they're talking about maybe doing, maybe even raising the rates in March, right? So that's kind of the background. The assumption, the markets have, reacted response, accordingly. So I think the stock market tanked, the crypto markets have tanked. They're really kind of in the dumps and people are wondering. So here's the thing. So the show, they start interviewing Danielle Booth and going into some of the details around it. And there were just a couple of takeaways that were really just resonating with me. And I just thought I would, watch that with you and just let's talk about it. Because I think there's some real relevant things we could weave that together, especially for those of us, in the industry. So this is part one where they're talking about kind of the Federal Reserve's effects on the markets. Right. So listen to
I'd love to get your thoughts on how some of this translates into markets in general, right? So returning to, I guess, the actions of the Fed here, this is a great chart that I saw that you tweeted out just earlier today. So for folks who are listening here, I'll do my best to describe it to you. But basically what we're looking at is post-GFC Fed balance sheet phases. So we're looking at QE, tapering, and tightening, essentially, and the impact that that's had on the U.S. 10-year and the S&P 500. So Danielle, what led you to tweet this out? What are your kind of takeaways when you look at this chart?
Well, my takeaway is, first and foremost, it's the increased sensitivity of the market, of the stock market, to bond yields. So every time the Fed tries to play this "we're going to tighten" meme, it takes less and less for them to break the market.
Let me pause there. this is something I've heard from other sort of market analysts, the last few months, and it's informing a lot of kind of my own thinking on what I think the market's going to do, what the housing market might look like, this year, 2022, and to the future. What she's referring to is the idea that the Fed is kind of out of options, because when the Fed raises rates or even talks about raising rates, it, quote, breaks the market, right? It takes less and less. It used to be that the Fed would actually have to raise rates pretty significantly in order to have an effect on the market, where people go, oh, okay, you know what, let's get out of stocks, let's get out of whatever and put it into bonds because we're going to make a lot more money because that's what interest rates are. What she and a lot of the economists and sort of market analysts are looking at is, over time, and especially after kind of the whole pandemic deal, all it takes is like just a whisper that the Fed might do something and the market takes a tank. It just tanks. And we're talking about rates that are near zero, right? I mean, the Fed funds rate, I think, is 25 basis points. And just the thought of we're going to raise rates, maybe 3 or 4 times, maybe up to 1% is enough to send the stock market into a tailspin, do crazy things to the bond market. And it's all this sort of high level macro, money manager stuff that I think most of us just, don't understand or don't care, right? It doesn't really affect us that much, except that it has major impact in one specific asset category. Well, in all of them, but really for our purpose, it has a major impact on housing. And it's, of course, all interconnected. So this is the next part of the video, which I thought was just super interesting, where they're talking about the impact of all of this on the housing market and how the housing market then in turn impacts the economy. So listen to this for a few minutes.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And this is, you're actually kind of, intuiting my next point here, which is, I think that the importance of housing just in general and what house prices have been doing for the last, let's say, 18 months. I know you've talked a lot about this. For folks who are not following along in the video, what we're looking at here is essentially growth in U.S. home prices. And that's been actually, it's been on an absolute rampage since January of last year. It looks like it's cooled down, I guess, starting in July. I guess what we're looking at actually here is January through October of last year. But it seems like things are starting to cool down. So I guess you started to get into it when we were just talking about this. But what do you see as the importance of U.S. home prices, right? Both in terms of inflation, but also just in terms of, the economy in general. What's the connection there?
So again, we're going to go back to the wealthy effect, because wealthy Americans, they have big homes, they have second homes, they have felt like splurging more. Let's just get a private charter jet, which injects money. I'm not trying to be obnoxious. That injects money into the economy. It employs people. And what the wealthy have been spending, because their residential real estate holdings have appreciated so much in such a short period of time, alongside with their stock holdings more than tripling off '09 lows. So the wealthy have felt so wealthy because of these two transmission mechanisms that they've spent a ton. And the people right below the wealthiest,
this is important.
They've seen their home price appreciation increase dramatically. And that's why we've seen credit card spending come off of its lows in the last few months, because the aspirational buyer is saying, I could sell my home tomorrow for twice what I paid for it. So I've got more leeway to spend. And I've got leverage in the workforce because my skills have not atrophied, because I haven't dropped out of the workforce. So my paycheck's a little bit bigger too. When you start to see home prices roll over, and we have seen 4 consecutive months in Case-Shiller of dissipating growth rates, at the same time that you're seeing rental inflation, what it is, this means that you're segueing. This is the inflection point from going to a seller's market to a buyer's market. And when you start to see price reduce signs, and you're hearing about some of the hottest markets in the country, Phoenix, Boise, Idaho, Austin, you're hearing that the hottest home price appreciation is coming off of that high boil, then that word's going to percolate quickly through the wealthy community who has been spending more than they otherwise would based on feeling wealthier.
Okay, and then she goes on to make the point that sort of trickle down economics. She makes fun of it. She said it doesn't really work, except it does work when we're talking about the wealthy feeling less wealthy. And then all of a sudden that trickle down happens almost instantly. And effectively what she's saying is the wealthy people stop spending money, right? So instead of, taking that private charter, they just take first class. Instead of flying first class, they fly coach. Instead of going to Disneyland for vacation, maybe they're going somewhere local. I mean, they stop spending money. That's kind of what she's referring to. Now, the thing about what she said, and this is the part I'm not sure where I sit with her. So go back to this graph that they use. I love this graph, but you could find it elsewhere as well. Yeah, certainly we're seeing this cooling, but we're still talking about 18% year over year, right? I mean, so I guess I'm like, okay, so we've cooled down from 20% year over year, but we're still looking at 18%. We're not like it's cooling, so therefore homes are now cheaper. So when she talks about flipping over from a seller's market to a buyer's market, I got to say, I sort of wonder, and this is one of my whole thesis around the macroeconomics of things, right? Like, really? So because homes have only appreciated 12%, let's say, year over year, is it all of a sudden going to open up the floodgates for buyers? I'm not sure I see that, right? Because we haven't seen wage growth keep anywhere close to this. In fact, I think the latest, and here's the screen that talks about that. Excuse me, the December numbers when they came out, what it's showing is for the average worker, they actually took a pay cut. Right? Real wages decreased by 2.4%. And I think that number's like seriously understating the impact on kind of the lower and middle class Americans, because this is assuming that inflation is only 7%, which was the December sort of nominal inflation rate. I mean, I don't know. There are a lot of folks who think that is just a made up bullshit number. And a big part of it is, guess what? Housing, right? So for example, this is the CPI, BLS, Gov, and I know it's impossible to see. So I'll just highlight this part right here, right? So look at this part right there. What it's saying is the CPI says that shelter, right, rent, I know it's hard to see. I'll just read it to you guys. That the shelter piece only went up 4.1% year over year from December 2020 to December 2021. And rent only went up 4.2%. Or rent to primary residence went up 3.3%. Like, how? Right? You know what I mean? It's like, how? How is that possible? Because again, if we go back to this chart, we know that the Case-Shiller index is up on a decline 18% over a year. So how is it that, shelter costs only went up 4%? Like, where are you getting this from? What about rent? It talked about primary residence rent going up only 3.3%, I believe. Let's see. Primary residence 3.3%. Okay. That's not any sort of actual rental numbers from the marketplace. This is from Multi-Housing News, and they do an ongoing sort of monthly what's happening with rent growth, right? So this is the latest one, I think, from December, maybe, and it's reflecting November numbers. Look at these numbers. We're talking about rents up in Phoenix over 25% year over year. Tampa's right around 25, just below 25%, so on down. San Francisco, which is not, I don't know how much percentage-wise their rents could go up considering the actual base rent. They're over 5%. So it's like, really? Rent only went up 3.3% for the purpose of calculating CPI? I don't know. Like I said, I'm not an economist. Maybe some economist wants to come and explain how that is doable, how that's possible. But fact of the matter is, a lot of folks think that 7% CPI is dramatically understating the actual impact of inflation on average non-wealthy people, right? Here's the issue. So think about, like, try and pull all this together. In part one, we heard about how the Fed, like, they don't have to do very much to crash the market. Okay. And if you see consumer spending drop and recessions start happening, then people start getting laid off. I mean, it's terrible news. And that's going to happen in an election year. Okay, so let's say the Fed goes and raises rates in March or June or whenever, right? Let's say 2022, right? Jerome Powell's come out and said, "Hey, we're going to, handle inflation. We're going to raise rates. We're going to taper. We're going to do these things." Okay, home prices start coming down, right? Because hey, fewer buyers, less buying power, etc. Home prices start coming down. As Daniel DiMartino Booth just said, the homeowners were spending more because they're like, my house doubled in value, and like it's not a big deal. I'm gonna go spend. And as she points out, if those homeowners start to feel less rich, if they start to feel like, my home's not actually have gained in value, or potentially even they worry that my home will lose value, they're going to stop spending, right? So they'll, rein it all way back, right? So they'll fly coach instead of first class. They will stay at a, Holiday Inn instead of at a Four Seasons. Whatever it is that they do, they'll go out less. It's going to result in less economic activity, which is recession. And that's just on housing. That's just if the Fed takes any action that's going to drop home prices. Or even, in some respects, I think, just look at the charts, if it slows down the home price appreciation, right? Again, look at this chart, right? If we go from this to, okay, now let's say in January, February, home prices are only up 12% year over year. Like all of a sudden people are like, oh my gosh, it's a huge, huge decrease. It's not a decrease. Home prices didn't go down. They just aren't going up as fast, right, as they were, in 2021. That's going to have this dramatic economic impact because it's the wealthy who are spending the money that's making our economy sort of chug along. That's super interesting. What that says to me is like, I don't know how we raise rates. I don't know how the Fed actually tapers. Like, sure, they might talk tough. They might actually do one. And then after they do one, the entire stock market breaks and we have a giant recession and, unemployment shoots up to, whatever, like in an election year in 2022 with control of the Senate at stake. I'm sorry. I just don't see it. Right. So there's some good news and some bad news around this. The good news, I guess, is if you're on the listing side of things, I think it's pretty safe to say that your revenue growth, your commission growth is going to continue at, these types of 18, 15, 12% year over year. So, look, I mean, as a realtor, as an agent, I suppose your income is going to keep pace with inflation. You're not going to be in the, minus 2.4%. Like I took a pay cut last year type of situation. On the negative side, though, if you represent mostly buyers, I think it's going to be even more frustrating. It's going to really, like 2022, I could see it really sucking. And it isn't as if 2020 and 2021 were, great times for buyer agents. I just don't see the buyer's market that Danielle Booth is talking about, like coming into being. Again, I could be dead wrong, y'all. Like, right? But just based on these numbers, just based on the data, I'm not seeing it. And that then leads to the third point, which is a super important one. And it's one that like I hadn't actually thought about, but the host, who's a young man, actually makes this point. And boy, it's really good. So let's listen to that real quick.
I'll flag one other thing as well. We don't have this chart here, but I've shown this in the recent past, which is basically the relationship between median income and home prices. There are charts on this. You can go all the way back to like the 1940s and 50s. And if you look at like the period of around the 70s or so, there was a ratio of about 3 or something like that. And if you look at what it is now, it's about 6, right? So all else being equal, it's about it's about 2 times more difficult to buy a home now, based on the median income in the United States. And I think something that might be surprising to a lot of folks that are on the older side, like in their kind of 40s or 50s, listening in the show, is what younger people think about the affordability of housing in general. Like, take some time over the next week, talk to your kid or someone that that's of the age bracket of like in their early 20s, and ask them how possible it is to buy and afford a home in the United States. I think the answers might shock you because very few people who are in my age bracket even view purchasing a home as something that's possible for them to do. And I think that trickles down into a lot of behavior, right? Like millennials and Gen Zs, they always get kind of accused of being, they don't want to save money. They just spend money on stupid things. But, not seeing that path, like like buying a home, that's supposed to be your first step on your journey to financial freedom, right?
That's
Because
right.
your home is supposed to appreciate. It's supposed to be collateral that you can use with your bank to get a loan to maybe start a small business. And suddenly when you don't see that path, then you don't really start saving anything. You don't have a goal for yourself. And you're just like, yeah, I might as well spend, an extra $2 or $3 on avocado because I don't really have a chance to make much of a difference in my own life anyway. Does that make sense to you?
That is such an enormous observation. I mean, enormous. Because if you think about the 70s and the baby boomers coming into their own and taking that first step because they could, because it was affordable, because it was natural, because it was expected, and saving along the way. And then they became the yuppies. And then, the credit card spending took off. And they're the people who we have to dust off in Congress now, who've made money all along the way. But that avenue was open and expected. It was a natural part of a society. It was a societal norm at the time. And now people are like, are you kidding me? I mean, recently they did a study of millennials who had purchased homes and they'd squeeze themselves into the payment. And they're like, dude, the HVAC just went out. I'm in a really hot place with no air conditioning and they want $10,000 in cash. I mean, and so owning a home is so much more expensive than just buying a home. And I think you're right. I think that these two generations, they're speaking amongst themselves saying, even if you can afford that payment, even if you can get an FHA loan for just 3.5% down, you're going to be shackled to this thing. And your quality of life is going to be decimated because you're tethered to something you can't afford. And so you can kiss your avocado toast goodbye forever. So
I thought that was a really deep point, y'all. And it's something that it just intersects with a lot of stuff that I've been concerned about for years, right? So, and I talk about it on the blog and I've written about it over and over and over again, which is looking at the millennials and sort of the truth about millennials. And I've recorded shows. I mean, I think the one, like this segment, what it really reminds me of the most is I recorded something with Nicole Lopez, who's a millennial realtor in Houston, who I know, good friend of mine. And we were talking about the difference between her generation and kind of the boomer generation, right? The difference in sort of living expenses, how completely out of whack different it is, and that sort of median income to median home price ratio. But what we didn't really touch on, what we really didn't really talk on, and again, I think it's because she is a realtor, right? So to people she tends to know are clients or potential clients who really have this home ownership in their mind, is what he said, which is that if you feel like you can't ever buy a home, like if home ownership is completely impossible, then yeah, why would you save, right? So when I posted this, when I talk about these things, over the last few years, whether it's boomers or it's Gen Xers like myself, you'll hear a lot of realtors just sort of say things like, well, stop eating avocado toast, stop spending money on stupid shit like $5 lattes at Starbucks, stop going on all these vacations that are super expensive, stop buying luxury cars, and you'll soon save up enough money to buy a home. Well, the thing is, though, psychologically and mentally, he's right. If you genuinely feel like there is absolutely no way I could ever buy a home because it's so far out of reach, it's beyond, it's not something that you could even plan. You can't dream of it, all right? Because it's just completely unrealistic. Then why would you save, right? Why would you save? And I think he's right. It does have a deeper impact on sort of the overall economic and lifestyle behavior of everybody, but particularly the millennials and Gen Z. And it's something we really don't talk about much. It's certainly not as society, certainly not as an industry. We just focus on hey, 30% of first-time home buyers are millennials. So yay, go millennial, and realtors have to go learn TikTok, right, in order to appeal to this new brand of shoppers. And we don't talk about this, right? We don't talk about these types of things that's happening. Bring that piece now into what we just talked about, the first two things. Okay, so we know that if the Fed does anything whatsoever, they're going to break the market. If they break the market, it will cause a recession. the Fed does anything whatsoever, raises mortgage rates by a bunch of amounts, and kind of causes the housing market to go into a decline, not a crash, not like homes are going to lose value. They're just not going to appreciate as fast. Then it's going to make the homeowners, the wealthier Americans, all of a sudden feel like, well, I'm less wealthy. I better watch what I spend. I have to pull back on spending. Okay, well, that has a cascading effect through the economy. Less meals out, less expensive cars, whatever it is. Now we're talking about really bad times economically in an election year where the millennials feel like they can't ever own and they're not saving and they're behaving in ways that are rational, right? And this is actually the thing I'm taking away. It is perfectly rational for like a 26-year-old to say, why wouldn't I buy this $1,000 handbag? Because it's not going to make a difference when home prices are so out of whack, I will never be able to afford down payment. Why am I sacrificing now for something I will never achieve? That is actually a rational decision. Boy, how does this play out in an election year in 2022? So I don't know. I don't know that there's an end. Again, I'm done with the making recommendations. But if you want recommendations, you call me and we'll have that conversation. I guess from my perspective, I'm pulling these threads together, saying this is what's happening. This is a major trend, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's all bullshit. Maybe they're wrong. But you know what? Maybe you should go talk to your people. And like he said, if you have some younger people in your sphere, maybe you should be asking them, like, how do you expect to be able to buy a house? A lot of the surveys that I've seen around this in the industry, do you want to buy a house? Do you want to be a homeowner? Well, sure. Everybody wants to be a homeowner. Maybe start asking them, do you expect to be a homeowner? Are you saving up to be a homeowner? And, correlate that to kind of their income levels, right? Because if you're talking to a power couple, 30-year-old computer programmer married to a 27-year-old doctor, who collective income is $350,000. They're like, yeah, we're saving up for home. Like, yeah, because, you're making $350,000. But what about kind of that middle class family? And y'all are realtors. I mean, a lot of you people listening to this are realtors. Like, you're in those communities. You know those people. Like, go talk to them. See what's going on. And I think it might be eye-opening. And then a lot of this sort of high-level macroeconomic interest rates, Fed fund rates, the repo market, currency, like all this stuff, it starts to kind of make sense, right? And this is, I think, one of the interesting things as I'm personally kind of going down this road is this stuff is not just academic interest. This isn't stuff, it's not some esoteric, you need a PhD in economics to even understand. No, this is pretty real stuff. It comes down to things like, will my 21-year-old child be able to afford a home? And if the answer is very difficult, is my 21-year-old child even saving? And what's happening with that? Is it related to things like inflation, money printing, lack of wage growth? Is it all connected? And the answer is, of course, it's all connected, because that's the way macroeconomics works. It's all connected. And again, who knows? It doesn't mean that you should change your business practice tomorrow. I will say this. If you think about what this trend portends, if you think about what these sort of macro things imply for the economy as a whole, for society as a whole, for the nation, for politics, for voter behavior in a midterm election year, I think you could probably figure out some things you might need to think about. Maybe you don't do anything right now, but you might need to think about them as we go through 2022, and especially as we look forward into, say, 2024, which is the big sort of the presidential election year. So anyway, I just thought it's fun to muse on this because, like I mentioned, this is one of the 3 or 4 mega trends that I'm paying attention to. And I just didn't know how to kind of really get into it until I saw this amazing video. Like I said, I shared big excerpts of it. The whole video is like 40 minutes long, and it's completely worth watching the entire thing. Please go watch it. Go subscribe to the channel and get educated, let's educate ourselves mutually. All right. Anyway, thanks for listening to my ranting and my musing. Bye, y'all.